Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, and some of this is going to be experiential, sharing my 35 years experience in the public sector, the private sector, but always being green, working on energy and environment. We are transitioning globally to a lower carbon economy. This is a journey that's just beginning, but it's being driven by several market drivers. Higher energy prices, more rapid and better technology shifting, a massive underinvestment both in the developing world and the developed world for energy and water infrastructure. Government mandates as market driver. What he was talking about in New Jersey has been driven by state-level incentives, which are in 14 states for renewable portfolio standards. And most importantly, this is not the 1970s and the early 80s when we had two oil shocks. The technology for renewables is a lot better. The technology for efficiency is a lot better. And there's a lot of opportunity. So we're looking at the beginning of global carbon markets. That's going to drive a lot of investment capital into this sector. We have 184 countries, not the United States, that have signed the Kyoto Protocol. You have 27 nations in the EU emissions trading scheme. And so there are a lot of factors that are moving the needle. So why green now? What's happened? Climate change impacts are unknown, but the science looks very ugly. And as we increase carbon intensity each year by combusting fossil fuels, it just seems to reason that we ought to do something sooner rather than later. So what that determinant is going to be is the price for carbon. That is going to drive investment capital into this sector. It has done some of that in the EU and the developing world through the Clean Development Mechanism and emissions trading. Cap and trade has worked as an environmental market benefit. There is no longer an acid rain problem in the U.S. Northeast because of markets. We have less urban ozone non-attainment in cities like Los Angeles and New York because of NOx emissions markets in 22 states. And unfortunately, the U.S. has gotten sidetracked through the denigration of cap and trade to cap and tax, and we're not seeing legislation. So where we're moving, and where I work, and I've been to 47 countries, are internationally and also at state and local level where there are incentives for these things. And what was mentioned before in the previous panel is we need regulatory certainty to provide financial certainty for investment. If you don't know what the rules are, you're not going to see major investment. In New York City, there are 4,000 private equity funds and 2 are green. So the reality is there's a lot of opportunity in this sector, but without the proper regulatory and policy framework, you don't see the deployment of capital. And although people would like a 100% renewable world, the reality is fossil fuels are not disappearing anytime soon. Today we have 250 million vehicles in the United States, 750 million vehicles in the world, and in the New York Times this morning, 40 million vehicles in China by 2020 per year. So we're going to be using fossil energy. The key is how we use that energy. It needs to be in a more environmentally benign and efficient manner. I worked with Toyota 13 years ago on the development of the Prius. And what's coming out soon will be the plug-and-play hybrids plugging into the electric grid and using less energy for transportation. That is very significant. And there's a lot of research and activity on electric cars, compressed natural gas vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, but that's very small scale. And you have to go back to what is the global infrastructure. And the global infrastructure for transportation is oil. And that's the reality. Looking at some technologies, for example, to reduce shipping emissions. Shipping emissions in the next 20 years are going to double. Now, why is that? Because we're combusting fossil energy. So the game changer is not using energy indiscriminately, but using it more efficiently. Now, the United States, the reason we have a very inefficient energy economy is because we were blessed with cheap and abundant natural resources. It's not the madness of engineers that did not design better technologies, but they didn't do it because they didn't have to. Here in New York City, you have 950,000 buildings, and 40 are green. So the retrofit market is where you're going to see the uplift. The built environment is very important to look at because newer construction will be greener and leaner. So my energy vision of the year 2030 is oil, gas, and cleaner coal, probably married to carbon capture and storage, renewables in all its forms being deployed from a small base, nuclear energy, and there is an uptick here in the nuclear industry for both small scale and large scale. Of course, the construction cycles are quite long and it is extremely capital intensive, but then again, we don't have fossil emissions with nuclear. And energy efficiency in all its manifestations, for transport, for power, makes a lot of sense economically, and that's going to reduce the carbon footprint. And you start looking at things like smart grid to clip peak demand. Here in the United States, in the next 10 years, we will retire 60,000 megawatts of coal-fired capacity doing nothing, because that's very inefficient and ancient. And there's a tremendous opportunity now to replace that with natural gas, renewables, and energy efficiency. So we're going to see cleaner technologies. I'm on the board of 9 clean tech companies. They're all small entrepreneurial companies, but folks are very driven to find solutions to how we use energy in a more environmentally benign way. That is the outcome everybody wants. As the planet increases to 9 billion people, we're going to have to deploy this technology more rapidly to developing countries. And the key, though, is it takes time to do this. There is no quick fix on energy and environmental issues. I mean, I worked on projects that took 7, 10, 15 years to fruition, and that's what we're talking about. However, the opportunity is immense. We're talking about alternative energy in all its forms, solar, wind, hydro, biomass, geothermal. We're talking about distributed energy. We're talking about energy efficiency. This building probably doesn't have energy efficient lights, for example. And when you start measuring carbon footprints at buildings, you will start looking at lighting systems because they increase the heating and cooling load. So there's a lot of holistic approaches. You've got medical science technology shifting over with biotech into energy, and you've got a tremendous amount of information technology that Silicon Valley is very adept at. But this is a lot bigger than just the smart grid and smart meters and net metering. This is infrastructure. This is a capital-intensive business, a $6 trillion global business called energy, very large with long lead times. And the good news is the ship is turning. There is a cognizance of energy companies, both in electric utilities and oil and gas companies, that they do have an emissions footprint that needs to be reduced. But here's your energy reality check. It's going to take decades to replace fossil fuels. We need to improve operational efficiency so we move beyond where we are today. Renewables are growing from a very small base, and they do need government subsidies and mandates to push the needle forward. And the solar, I work on solar PV projects between 2 and 20 megawatts, not just in New Jersey, and we need the mandates of government, but the reality is you still need the financing for these things. And so that's growing, and we're seeing the solar cost curve go down. That's a good thing. The existing infrastructure needs to be fine-tuned. Coal is not going away. It's just a reality. It needs to be cleaner, greener. It needs to have the carbon element captured and stored, and that can be done. And as someone mentioned before, the government doesn't spend a lot of R&D, but the private sector for venture capital globally last year was $5.6 billion for clean tech. That's one energy project. That's very little capital. We need hundreds of billions of dollars to be deployed over the next decades. So it's a $1 trillion opportunity. And this capital, a lot of it's going to be private sector. I work with hedge funds, private equity funds, and venture capital funds, and we need to scale a lot more investment in green. We just can't have the rhetoric of green. We have to have the deployment of capital and finance in green, and that's just beginning. So the model is we have both large-scale, so-called utility-scale projects, and small-scale projects, distributed generation. We have 1.6 billion people on the planet today who do not have access to electric power. I'm on the board of a nonprofit in India where we have lit 25,000 homes through a very simple technology of PV, solar, a battery, and LED lamps, and and staying the course. But I'm very optimistic for the simple reason that green will become mainstream because the demographics are shifting. I do a lot of lecturing at universities. I'm on the board of the University of Michigan's Urban Institute for Global Sustainability. And in my eyes, every kid under 30 has the green gene. Liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. And if you don't think so, go ask your kids what they're being taught. They get it. And so these great generational shifts take time. I participated in the first Earth Day in 1970 in Pittsburgh with my little solar power T-shirt. And so it takes time, but we are on a path where this is going to become a birthright to learn to live with more cleaner environment, but also environmental regulation, complexity, and compliance. Thank you very much.